Disturbed, everybody. I am Daryn Carp here with
I don't love
Aggrieved,
my hair.
Miffed. It's too perfect for me
I know.
today, but it
Hi,
almost looks.
everyone.
You look like Syl in The Sopranos, where it's just like perfectly coiffed. You look up
Well,
Syl,
uh,
SIL, The
what kind of a
Sopranos.
name is Syl?
It's Silvio, short for Silvio, but no one calls him
Oh,
Silvio. It's Syl. It's Stephen
all
Van
right.
Zandt from the E Street Band, but it's
Okay,
just
I
his
see
hair
him.
is
Yeah.
like too perfect, and
It
that's what
does
you look
look
like
like
today.
that.
And you're John
And
Thrasher, by the way,
I am
everybody.
John
That's
Thrasher. Hi, everybody.
oh,
Yeah, if you're watching on Patreon or YouTube, it's not shaping the way that I want to, but it if
it's
this was the
shaping.
shape that I liked, it would be perfect,
Mm,
but
mm.
I don't know.
We're not
I
feeling
feel
it.
like I need a haircut every like 5 days. Is that normal? I don't know that that's normal. I
I
should be
think
thankful,
men they
right?
just
Yeah.
notice it so much more because your hair grows half an inch a month, and I think for men,
Yeah.
half an inch a month is
Yeah.
quite a bit. It's
I
quite a bit.
know. And
For me, I wouldn't notice it.
I was just talking to someone recently about how I should just be thankful I have hair because a lot of guys my age, Darren's face says it all. For those of you watching, are not typically doing
Can this
so
be
great
the
in the
thread
hair
this week?
department. Oh my God, this face.
That's the face
Okay, if
of
you're listening
men
to
your
our
age.
podcast and the audio, fly over to YouTube right
Yeah.
now.
Fly, fly over, hit that smash subscribe button, and check out
Oh my
that
God.
face.
By the way, I should use that in the screenshot, right?
No,
For
that's
our
what I'm saying. That's
thumbnail.
the
Okay.
thumbnail. That's the
Oh, that's what you
thumbnail.
were saying. Okay.
But
All right.
welcome
Well,
to Shaken and
yes.
Disturbed to
Hi,
everybody.
everyone.
We are here. We are ready to get going with our
We're
case.
queer,
It's the end of Pride. I think we got about one more week left. So, John, you're gonna have to change
Yeah.
that watch band.
I turned straight at the stroke of midnight.
Because July 1, if you're wearing rainbow anything, you know what happens. I don't want to say it, but
It's true. No, it's
you
true.
know,
You're
didn't want to
funny
say it.
today. All right, let's get into I mean, you're always funny, but you're cracking me up
Oh,
today.
okay, good. Okay, good.
And you're like,
All
"Oh,
right,
okay."
let's get into this week's
Wait,
case.
before we go on, I
Oh
just want to say
God.
I forgot to mention that I was going to text you yesterday, and let's just get this out of the way. I have a bag of shrimp in my freezer that's been in there for 2 years. Do you think that it's okay to eat that?
In the freezer?
Yeah.
I would think so.
Google and ChatGPT
I'm gonna do
said
it.
that
Oh.
it would probably still be edible, but it would the texture and flavor would have gone away. And I'm like, I don't want to like cook old shrimp and it like dissolves in a pan. You know what I
I
mean?
mean, wouldn't you I mean, the thing is though, let me just say this up top because like Nadine's like, up the expiration date was a day ago, it's done. And I'm like, no, it's
Yeah.
usually like Best Buy. That's the peak of when it's its best, but then it comes down. Like that's just how. Oh,
Yeah.
according to the USDA, frozen shellfish like shrimp is
Ocean?
safe to eat indefinitely, but
Okay.
its flavor and texture might decline over time.
Okay. That's what ChatGPT said. In fact, ChatGPT probably went right to that account.
Yeah.
Um,
But I will
okay.
say, I think we waste a lot of food in this country, like
I know we
specifically
do.
in
No.
America, because we have
Yeah.
food abundance, which is a sign of a healthy country. It's obviously a sign of wealth. This is all good stuff. I'm not saying that
Oh.
we should like, thank you, eat every last bit of a chicken bone, but I do think in
Ugh.
general, um, those dates of those things, like so much you can tell by just like the look and smell of something. Like
Okay, so
before
because you brought
and
this up,
yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say before the like USDA or FDA or any of these
Yeah.
things like created those expiration dates and those things, like how the fuck do you think people like knew if they could eat meat that they cooked on a fucking rock outside, in dirt? So I'm just saying, I think people need to loosen up a little bit with their ideas of
You're like,
just
go outside and eat in the
expiration dates.
grass, everybody.
Well, I do think to some extent we'll probably know. And granted, no one wants food poisoning. I'm not saying eat mayo that's been out, in the sun for
That's what I was gonna
days.
say. I was
But
just gonna say today, literally this morning, I made a sandwich for work, put mayonnaise on it. I mean, for lunch or whatever to take to work. And excuse me. And I was about to walk out the door and I was like, wait a minute. I think I've had that mayonnaise in there for too long. I go back to my refrigerator and the mayonnaise says best by,
right,
not
which is at its
expires
what
by.
Best Buy is just at its peak of really goodness. It's like that's when its taste is
Okay.
the best. So even if you hit it a week later, it's still good. It just
It
might not be
was,
at its
it
how long,
was,
John?
it was, it was a month. But to your
That's not
point,
that bad.
but to your point, I
I
smelled
thought you were going to be
it.
like 3 years.
I smell. Oh my god, no! I smelled it and took a little bit of a taste, and I was like, "This completely smells and tastes completely normal." TBD. I had lunch today, no problem so far. But anyway, this is so ridiculous. But my point is, I always come to my parents for this stuff, like my father and Daryn. It was
Sure.
just recently Father's Day. We'll get to
Yes.
some thoughts about that in NMR, but in case you want to say thing, or I mean, I'm sorry for in our
Because you
listener
didn't wish
shout
me
outs.
Father's Day and NMR. So cool.
Oh, we'll get to it today. But
Yeah.
do you want to say
Okay.
anything to the listeners who may have
Well, I thank
wished you
everyone
well?
who wished me a happy Father's Day. I thank everyone who wished Nadine a happy stepfather's day and a happy step birthday. John said nothing. So that's all I
I
have to
said
say.
nothing. It's true.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I posted in our Facebook group. I was the only one, first one that did. Thank you.
I think I blocked
Oh,
you.
oh yeah, you blocked.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get into this week's episode before people start unsubscribing. Okay,
Yes.
here we
In
go.
the fall of 1991, 14-year-old Cateresa started the eighth grade. And her last year as a middle schooler, where she excelled in math and dreamed of one day becoming an accountant, which is kind of cool. A, I like that a woman wants to become an accountant, and B, that at that young of an age that like accountant,
Yeah,
like I feel like when you're in middle school, you're still like doctor, lawyer, astronaut
yeah,
type of
yeah.
thing, like you're in
What did
that
you want to be at
game show
14?
host. I've always wanted to be a game
Even
show
at
host.
14?
I knew at 7.
What do we what how can we make this happen? I mean, I want to make this happen for you. Are
Well,
you
I'm
developing
trying.
something?
I am developing. I've been developing. I am trying.
Okay, all right.
We'll see. Hopefully the
Can
next
I
10
help you
years are really
develop? I
gonna
want to do something. I
yeah.
let me say this too. I'm not just saying this to like toot my own horn here, but when you develop something like this, I really think that you should come to me because I I think I know you so well and so do so many other people, but like do you have people, anyone else in your life that you have a closer work relationship with than me and like Andy, of course? Like in terms of like duration of time and weekly. I was
Oh,
thinking this
no.
about you. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm always like using you as a reference for things,
Yeah,
because you
no, I don't
are
think
not only a
so.
friend, but you've seen me working every single week for like 8 years now.
Yeah, truly anyone it would
10
be
years.
like Watch What Happens Live or
Yeah.
Andy people, but really outside of Andy, it
Yeah.
would be just you, I think.
Yeah.
So,
So
yes, I will.
I'm just saying, keep me posted because I love, by the way, and I will say this as well. When I was working at Space Station and was the lead producer on your two podcasts, I felt like I know exactly what type of cases you would love. Like I just feel like I'm right there, like
You know
lifting you
me.
up. Yeah, I
You
know you.
are.
You're
You
we're
are.
the Pat and Vanna of true crime podcasting.
You
By
lift
the
me
way,
up and you
Pat,
tear me down. Yeah.
and I do
I
tear
know.
you down.
This
Pat,
last
thank you
show.
for your time. For your time. I know.
You almost said thank you for your service, which would also track.
Service. I did too. I know. By the way, Wheel of Fortune had such a huge impact on my life. It's like crazy to think that he's not hosting
I
it.
mean,
But
it
anyway,
taught people English. It actually taught a lot of
me
people how to
too.
read in English
Me
and think
too.
about things and like that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, game shows are good like that. I
Yeah.
think anyway.
We're digressing, but keep
So
going here.
Cateresa wanted to become an accountant, and she was a bubbly fashionista who loved shopping and loved shopping for all the latest trends. And by the time November rolled around, she was already shopping for her graduation outfit, excited about getting to dress up and maybe even ride in a limousine with her friends. I miss this time
I
in
know,
my
and
life.
I just want to say, and when I was in eighth grade, if you were one of the top five, what are they called? Fundraiser sellers of this like
Yes, of like
fundraiser that we did.
tickets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you were in the top five, you got to go in a limousine with a chaperone,
Oh.
with a teacher, and you got to go to
With a chaperone, not
McDonald's.
chaperone, just making
Not
sure.
Chapel Roan, who I also love and we talked
And you
about on
got to go to
NMR.
McDonald's. Did I just hear that
And you could go to
correctly?
McDonald's and you could get 10-piece nugget and sweet and sour sauce. And it was like the thrill. Like I had never even thought of a limousine. I was like, what's a limousine?
That's
What?
so
It's
fancy. Yeah.
and I was like, I think probably the top one because I was determined to be able to go in this limousine and I'll never forget it. And I was probably in like sixth grade actually, because I remember being like super young. But yeah, limousines, like just like Cateresa, like it was just so exciting for me.
I took a limousine maybe a year ago in the city. I was out with my girlfriends. I won't say who. And I
Okay.
was out with my girlfriends and we were all like drunk, maybe a little like stoned here and there. And so, you know how in New York City you can get one of those like black cars with all the lights in it, and you get them to you get them. You're like $50, it'll take you
Oh no, I
downtown or
didn't even
whatever.
know that, but
Oh
that's
yeah, they're
okay.
like
Okay.
so my friend like $50. She's like, drive us to Cubbyhole, which is like a gay bar, and
I'm
we were probably like in the 30s, right? So going down to
okay.
Cubbyhole was like 10 minutes, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So we're like in the back of this
Do I
guy's
know
car.
this
It's all lit
person?
up. No, I don't think you've ever
Okay.
met her.
Okay.
And it's all lit up, and we're in the back, and we're like smoking, having a good time, and like the ride is literally like 8 minutes. And my friend who called the car, she's like, "What? I paid him $50." She gets out, she starts screaming at the driver. She's like, "Excuse me, I paid you $50 to get us here." And he's like, ma'am, we are here." she's she
She's
was
like,
so
oh,
she was so out of it that she had like yelled at this driver who did
she
exactly
thought
what
it was
she
going to
paid
be
him to
like a
do.
longer ride or
Right. She's like,
something.
what the fuck? So
Oh my
it was so funny,
God.
makes me laugh. Anyway,
That's
so
good. I love it.
I sincerely apologize to this man, by the way. I
Yeah, I
was
was
like,
gonna
I'm
say,
so
yeah.
sorry. Like, this is absurd. Anyway,
Yeah.
so Cateresa lived in Harvey, Illinois with her parents, but often visited her grandmother in the nearby town of Dixmoor after school before taking a bus home later in the evening.
I'm sorry, Dixmoor. Okay.
Not somewhere I'm living.
I might want to check out this little town.
Yeah, so well, maybe it's not so
Well,
little.
oh,
Wow. Oh,
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 oh, oh.
oh. Thank you. On Tuesday, November 1991, Cateresa left her grandmother's house in Dixmoor, but unfortunately, she didn't arrive home. And though her family and the authorities looked for her, she wasn't found until December 8th, which is like
Mm,
3 weeks later, when police received a call about a body by the side of Interstate 57. Now, the body did, in fact, belong to Cateresa, who had been killed by gunshot wounds to her head, which
mm.
feels very violent for a young girl who probably
At
didn't
that
have
age,
a
yeah.
huge defense system to her. Like, why? Like, a lot of times we hear about strangulation
Mm-hmm.
and, stuff like that. Maybe, obviously, beaten to death in some sort of way, but gunshot wounds just feel super like this. She's a young girl. I'm not really sure how much defense she could have had, and that feels like it would have taken
Exactly.
her a bigger force. Now,
Yeah.
authorities did discover her body, unfortunately undressed from the chest down, and were able to positively determine that she had been sexually assaulted at the time of her attack, of
Mm.
course. And at the scene, detectives performed a genital swab, which came back positive for semen. So we do know that she was raped.
I
However,
hate
it would be
this.
10 months, almost a full year, before detectives were able to make any significant break in the case when they received a tip from a boy about Cateresa's age.
Yeah, and so according to this 15-year-old boy, another boy who lived in the neighborhood, 14-year-old Jonathan Barr at the time, had watched Cateresa get into a car with a group of other teenagers on the afternoon that she vanished. And if the tip turned out to be true, this would have been the last known sighting of Cateresa while she was still alive. The
I
boys, yeah,
Sorry
go
to
ahead.
interrupt. I just like it took 10 months for sort of this tip, let's say, we're not even going to say
Right.
evidence, to come to light. I really wonder what went down in those 10 months. Like, do people come forward
Are they,
because they
yeah,
realize that they're like, oh shit, that would have been part of the case? Or is it like you're trying to fight not being part of something and you're feeling really
yeah.
guilty and your guilty conscience is getting on you? That's really like the interesting psychological time period that I'm actually super fascinated by, is to sort of like what makes people come forward after a certain, I get it immediately, but 10 months?
And
I mean,
especially young kids, because you have to think that these parents have a lot to do with whether or not they come forward with
and
tips.
you'd think, maybe the parents had said something on the side about something, and then the parents were like, wait, what did you say? Like,
Yeah, totally.
is that a tip to something? So just really interesting to me.
I agree. And these boys who were last seen with Cateresa were Robert Veal and Robert Taylor, both 14, and Shane Sharp and James Harden, both 17. So again, like I said, all minors under the age of 18,
Right.
something to think about as we proceed here. So on October 29th, 1992, Robert Veal was brought into the police station for questioning without his parents or an attorney present, which is
This
probably not a good
seems
idea.
wrong. Okay.
He was kept at the station for more than 5 hours. Eventually, the boy crafted and signed a handwritten statement saying that he, Robert Taylor, Shane James, and Jonathan Barr, the secondhand eyewitness, were all involved in Cateresa's rape and murder.
Jesus.
And I'm already thinking of
Well,
what's his name from How to Make a Murder or whatever
Brandon
that
Dassey.
Brandon
But
Dassey, thank you.
I'm thinking to myself, great that they get a confession, but B, this is not going to be able to hold up in court without
Yeah,
a mother
right.
or parent present because these kids are fucking children. So
Yeah.
this doesn't feel justicey to me.
I agree. Police then brought the other 14-year-old Robert Taylor in for questioning on the same day. The boy was kept in custody for over 21 hours without parental or legal assistance, and, as you might expect, ultimately signed a statement implicating himself and the other 14s in the crime.
Yeah.
Shane Sharp was also brought in for questioning, which resulted in another signed confession. Though each of the three boys were ready to confess their guilt by the end of their time with police, each of their statements were different in ways that blatantly contradicted the other two. And this is when you know
Interesting.
it's a coerced confession when all of them are just completely different. So, however, well, or at least that's what I would assume. However, the confession statements in hand, all with confessions, with confession statements in hand, all five boys were arrested and held in custody as they awaited trial. So it's a really uncomfortable, unrealistic situation, frankly. Again, I do want to mention it is the 90s, which just gets further and further away mentally in my own head. But like, that was like 30 some years ago at this point. And it just was a different time when it came to the criminal justice system. It just was. I mean, of course, every decade has its own, even just like media cases that kind of define a generation, so to speak. But this is um, is it pre OJ? Yeah, I think pre OJ. I don't know. It's
Just
just be
right at the time of
mindful.
vote. But if you get a
Yeah,
confession from a 14-year-old or 16-year-old or whatever,
yeah,
a minor, how often, how soon are the parents contacted? Like, do the parents not know when they're in
totally.
custody? Like, that's kind of what I
Good
want to know.
question. Yeah, it's a good
Where do
question.
they think these kids are?
Yeah, and like, did they drive them to the police station and then
Right.
leave because they're in custody now? That's shocking and horrifying in and of itself. Well, nonetheless, by the way, guys, we just want to mention, we want to take a second and say thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers who committed to, or sorry, commented on our most recent post, asking for case suggestions. There are lots of good ones. Daryn and I were just talking about it before the show started. We have a full document that we're going to email to Megan right after the show.
Yeah, we sent
Um,
it straight over to Megan to look
yeah,
into. And of course, just a reminder that Radish and Sussy Radishes on Patreon, you get first dibs on your case suggestions.
yeah. And if you want to join in on the fun with our community of radishes over there, you can join today for as little as $5 a month. You can actually get it cheaper if you sign up annually. So it's extremely cheap.
Come
But
join
yeah,
our garden.
there you
That's our
go.
that's our new statement. Come join our garden. You can join us at patreon.com/shaken and disturbed, or obviously we'll make it super easy for you and you can just click the link right in our show notes.
Lovely.
Well, in June of 1994, a couple years later now, the trial had still not commenced and the young men were still in jail. It
Wow.
was around this time that the state crime lab finally processed the swabs taken from Cateresa on the day her body was discovered. It's just crazy that it would take this long.
Yeah. I mean, I
Also,
just don't understand it.
remember that book I was telling you about last week, What the Dead Know by Barbara Butcher, who
Yeah.
was a medical examiner for New York City, like an investigator? Holy fuck. I finished the book. It was awesome. But she
Mm,
talked about, sort of at the end of this book, she talked about certain cases that kind of stuck with her and just like the sloppiness under which
yeah.
sometimes the evidence can be handled by these, for lack of
Mm-hmm.
a better word, really shitty
Yeah.
forensics teams. Obviously not everyone, but basically talked about how this one woman just like was so careless, didn't think her work was bad, contaminated samples, cross sampled them. So not only do you have to now like let potentially guilty people go free, you also potentially put innocent people in jail. And
Right.
it's just like shitty all around. And forensics teams, like, these are the things that solve
Yeah.
cases. So it just seems like something that they really need to be better with in some sort of way that they can streamline this process.
And I feel like I don't know exactly what time frame you're referencing here, but I do feel like the 90s was like sloppy and then
This
like the
was in like the
2000s.
90s. Yeah,
That makes sense.
this was in the 90s. It might have even been in the early 2000s because she also talked about what happened after September 11th and just the
Mm,
crime scene, obviously, of all of that. So
right.
this was not far. This was in the 10-year range of
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but in New York City specifically. But anyway,
Right.
so they finally process the swabs that were taken from Cateresa on the day her body was discovered. Now, though all 5 boys were implicated in her sexual assault, only a single unidentified male DNA sample was found on the swabs. The DNA collected did not match any of the defendants, which is
So how
really,
the fuck have they been in jail for 2 years?
unless they're responsible for her demise and for some
Something
reason she
else,
had
yeah.
sex with the person voluntarily maybe
Right.
beforehand, or
Good
I
point.
think it would be pretty rare for her to be raped by somebody, let go, and then killed by these 5 boys. But
Five
I'm
other
just saying,
guys,
like,
yeah.
in theory, I guess it's possible. Now,
Mm-hmm.
in spite of this, the DA chose to continue prosecuting based on the signed confessions, even moving to prosecute Jonathan Barr and Robert Taylor in adult court, which, as we know, they're younger than 18.
Yeah.
And there's no evidence outside of these written confessions by children tying them to the case. Now, the motion was initially denied. The judge presiding over the case was extremely suspicious of the 3 confession statements that differed
Good.
wildly on important details about the crime. If you're going to confess, have the details be the same.
Well, if it's a real confession, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so
We'll have to
sussy.
see. Yeah.
Yes. Now, but the DA appealed the decision from this judge on the grounds the judge had abused his discretion with the initial denial. I don't know how you can abuse that
Yeah. How
discretion.
does that work? You're a judge.
Well, yeah, or abuse the discretion in terms of like there's just this should not be brought to court because we're going to put the wrong people in jail, or they could
Yeah.
appeal and then it will get written up, and then it'll be 20 years before we actually solve this case.
Right.
But before trial began, uh
I've been
Cheyenne.
saying Shane. I think it might be Cheyenne, but I, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah,
Cheyenne
well,
or Shane?
Shiner Shane and Robert Veal made deals with the DA. Each pled guilty to first-degree murder and were sentenced to 20 years in prison, the
Wow.
possibility of parole after 7. And in theory, especially when you're young, possibility of parole after 7, if you're on best behavior, you can still live your life. You
Yeah.
can still have a
To
life.
some degree. Right.
In exchange, both young men had to testify against the other 3 defendants. Now, that's pretty big. James and Robert Taylor were tried together and found guilty of murder in the first degree. Both were sentenced to 80 years in prison. Jonathan Barr, one of the initial eyewitnesses, was tried on his own. He was convicted and he was sentenced to 85 years in prison. This is the rest of these people's lives. All 3 young men appealed their convictions and made requests for additional DNA testing on the evidence collected at the crime scene. Each request was denied, and all 5 men, really boys, remained in prison. It is crazy that to make for additional requests of DNA testing, I don't really understand this, why it's denied. I understand that there's like backlogs of things. But if it's true, then the evidence will hold up in court. What is the problem of retesting something like that?
Right.
Like I don't really understand outside of the fact that it obviously costs time and money and energy, but for a court case like this,
Yeah.
especially when the DNA didn't match her, so how could you tie them to a rape or something like that? Why wouldn't you test it again?
It sounds like there's some sort of ineffective assistance of counsel here because it's just common sense. I mean, we're not lawyers, but I think after almost 1,000 episodes of this stuff, we kind of have our own thoughts about it. But yeah, it is rather shocking. Well, in 2009, the legal team representing James and Robert Taylor repetitioned for additional DNA testing. This time, a new judge agreed and allowed the evidence to be resent to a lab.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Again, this is though 20 years later. I mean, 10
Yeah,
years
it's
later, whatever
crazy.
this is, like it's nuts.
Yeah. It took over a year to even locate the evidence, which was not found until the judge granted a new order to allow the defense team to search the state's logbooks and scour the evidence storage area themselves. This is crazy. And I just said the 90s were sloppy, and look at this, 2009,
Right.
2010. In 2010, two of the defendants who initially gave handwritten statements to the police, Shane Sharp and Robert Veal, both recanted the testimony they had given at trial, stating their stories were fake. The new DNA testing was concluded in March of 2011.
Conducted. Sorry, conducted, not
Oh, what
concluded.
did I say? Sorry. Concluded.
Concluded. Yeah.
Sorry. Conducted in March of 2011. Thank you, Daryn. And this time there was a match in the database. I'm assuming this is probably CODIS that we're talking about here.
Right.
The DA belonged to a man named Willie, excuse me, the DNA belonged to a man named Willie Randolph, not any of the five men in prison. At the
Doesn't,
time of,
by the way,
yeah,
doesn't Willie Randolph like sound like an old man's name?
it does. Yeah,
Like
it
Willie Randolph
does.
is like not 14. He's not
No,
16. Like Willie
no.
Randolph is an older
Well,
man.
well, he is because, by the way, at the time of Cateresa's murder, Willie, who is now 58, was 33 years old. You were right, Daryn, and
Yeah.
living in Dixmoor on parole after serving a 20-year prison sentence for armed robbery. On November 22nd, 1991, 3 days after Cateresa first vanished, police had received a call alerting them to the presence of a dead body near a pizza parlor close to the spot where her body was eventually found. Although cops responded to the call, they were unable to locate a body. Authorities
How
now believe
how
that
how
Willie was. Go ahead.
how is that possible though? Like you get a call alerting them the presence of
Yeah,
a
I have
dead
no
body near a
idea.
pizza parlor and
The
then you
only thing I
don't
can
find the
think of,
body?
well, the only thing now, listen, authorities believe that it might have been Willie that was that anonymous caller. So maybe he's throwing them off the scent, or maybe he even moved the
Maybe.
body. A
Yeah.
lot of different scenarios could really have happened here. But on November 3rd, 2011, the DA's office finally dismissed all charges against the five men. Jonathan James and Robert Taylor were released from prison on the same day. The three men were compensated $208,800 each for their time that they spent in prison, which, by the way, I think changes on a state by state basis. I believe Maryland, you get $1 million for every year served. Um, so there's that. By this time, Shane and Robert Veal had already been released from prison after completing their sentences, but their charges were vacated on January of 2012.
So I wonder what the deal is with the false confessions. And also, I feel weird sometimes about like, I'm not saying that these people shouldn't be compensated, but the way we compensate these people is through taxpayer money. So the people who
Right.
make mistakes are just using money that isn't theirs. They're using our hard earned money to
Mm-hmm.
pay for their mistakes. And that is
Totally.
not going to incentivize anyone to try and get it right the next time. If their
Right.
pay was docked,
Right. No, that's what it should be. I mean,
you
this
know,
is,
their pensions were docked,
yeah,
then I think we'd have some
exactly.
incentive to get it right. But because it's just taxpayer money, it's free money.
This is the thing that I remember when we were starting Martinis and Murder and we would hear about these, we would do these cases from time to time. And I kept like, I remember waiting to learn the truth about this. Like, I'm like, there's no way, like, these people just keep getting away with it, these police and investigators. Like, there's no way that, like, the money, the incentives aren't there to do the job correctly. And it's like, here we are years later, and it's like exactly how you just described it. And it's really disturbing, actually. It's a
Yeah,
weird, it's a
I
weird
don't like
flaw
it.
in the system, if you ask me.
I just don't think that the taxpayer, I think those people should be compensated, but I don't think the taxpayer should be punished for other people's mistakes. I
Of
don't think that
course not.
incentivizes anything.
Yeah.
Well, one of the prosecutors who worked the Dixmoor 5 case issued an apology to the men who were wrongfully arrested, as well as
Mm,
their families. She offered up her regret that the system didn't protect them, instead victimizing them, quote, in a way that could never possibly be repaid, end quote.
mm,
The five men sued the police department, claiming that authorities had coerced an initial
yeah.
confession statement from Robert Veal, who was learning disabled and underage at the time of his arrest. That's fucking appalling. Brandon Dassey, as to your
Yeah,
point one time.
I was just going to jump in here. I think the key here, aside from, of course, the being learning disabled and that being a big part of it, but the underage part we shouldn't skip over because, I mean, think about being 14, 15, 16, and you're in a what, interrogation room, and you're basically being told if you don't confess to this, you're going to still go to jail. Like, I'm sure who I think was very straight laced and followed the rules, if I were ever in that situation, I probably would have been scared out of my mind and just done whatever it took to make the police or the interrogators happy because, it's a tactic. It's a way to get what you want if you're the police. Why they want that, I
I
don't
don't know.
know. I don't know
I
if it's
think
like
just
to
a
create calm in a community or something,
I
but
think it's that. I think that, the public wants answers to things, and I think quotas, and I think people just want to have a
mm-hmm.
case solved. They're not really interested in actually solving the case.
Actually,
They're just
the truth.
actually
Yeah.
saying, like, yeah, it's done. When there's nothing, and there's just no incentive for good police work unless you're good
Yeah.
police. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it's pretty hard. So The lawsuit also alleged that police gave Veal information that was not available to the public before he made his confession.
Interesting.
Furthermore, the three men who initially gave statements claimed that they were physically abused and verbally threatened during their time being questioned by police. These are
Yep.
14-year-old kids, 17-year-old
Yep.
kids, which led in part to their completely fabricated confessions.
Right. And that's basically exactly what I was saying. Well, on June 25th, 2014, only 10 years ago, almost to the day of us recording. Let's see, when does this episode come out? Yeah, comes out on the 23rd, you guys. So
Yeah.
almost 10 years exactly. The state settled, agreeing to pay out $40 million to the five men, an amount that matched the settlement paid out the week prior to the defendants in the Central Park jogger case.
Wow.
So in August of 2016, a year later, Willie Randolph was arrested and charged with the kidnap, sexual assault, and murder of Cateresa. What took that so long? But finally, in November of 2021, are you ready for this? Willie was acquitted and allowed to go free. Now, how if you have a DNA match?
Yeah, that's what unless there's evidence, I'm looking it up because like also Willie Randolph is a baseball coach. We're not talking about that.
Yeah, we're not
Um,
talking about him. I just
especially
find it
because she
odd.
was
Like,
murdered.
what's that?
Especially because she was murdered. Charges of Mephalia.
Yeah, it's so
Your
weird.
young was raped and murdered while on the school bus, and just like, yeah, he was acquitted, but why?
It's hard to say. I mean, 2021, I mean, he's probably in his 70s, I'm assuming around that time, maybe even a little older. Not that that should matter, but yeah,
Yeah, it's just like, especially because his DNA was linked to it. That's what's so
it's unsettling, right?
that's what's so unsettling. I'm trying to look this up to see if there's like more that we know of. He was serving
Yeah,
already sentences on drug charges, but like, I don't know. It's really bothersome to have these things
yeah,
kind
it
of go down.
is.
Hopefully, he was an old man and he's not going to be able to do much damage anymore. But still, for Cateresa's family, it's like, how do you
Yeah, for the
escape?
justice of it all, right?
Exactly.
Well, let
Exactly.
us know what you guys thought about this week's episode. You can follow us and mention us on all the social platforms at J Thrasher, at Carpe Daryn. Hit us up in our Facebook group, and of course, join us on Patreon, and we can respond to you directly there. Daryn, let's get into some listener shout outs. I know we want to talk about your Father's Day.
Well, I wanted to take this time to thank you all so much for all your Father's Day shout outs. Our friend of the show, Jamie, even celebrates in the Facebook group saying, such a father figure to us all. And it's true. And I
Yeah.
really appreciate that, Jamie. I am Father God. I am father. And I am probably, let's be honest, the best person John
Oh,
and everyone else knows. I
all
didn't
right,
want to
moving
say it.
moving right
Yep.
along.
Okay.
Kylie, thank you, Darren.
Yep.
Kylie in our Facebook group said, "quote Listening to NMR number 65, and I want to add to the conversation around play. For those of you who don't know, just a side note, I was talking on a recent NMR episode about how adults should just go play more and how it's more of a positive thing, and we're all just wrapped up in our jobs and kids and spouses, but we should have more fun." Anyway, she says everybody on here needs to read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Hands down, the book of the century surrounding the conversations around connections, technology, and the lack of free play. And Darren, I
Yes.
noticed you had a response. You've actually read this book.
Yeah, I read it a couple weeks ago. Big fan of Jonathan Haidt. I did Happiness Hypothesis. He's done a number of things. I've talked about him. He's a social, like a psychology kind of social economy professor at
Yeah.
NYU Stern, and he wrote The Anxious Generation. Did all this press tour for it. I read it. It's a remarkable book. He suggests kind of four main things that parents, it really comes at the parents that really need to stick together
Mm,
because kids come home from school and they're like, well, I want
right.
Instagram because John has Instagram. And if parents
Mm-hmm.
are really able to stick together in this, then after a few weeks the kids won't really notice that they don't need to have all this stuff. So no smartphones before high school, but
Yeah.
sorry, no smartphones before high school, no social media before 16. They should have smartphone free schools, so you can still have an Apple Watch or a flip phone or something like that in order to alert anyone for emergencies, but nothing where you can actually post, you can check at the end of the day. And then the fourth, and I think the most important one, which really is coming into terms here with not only schools but parents and a sense of community, is having more independent free playtime for children. Recess is really caught up right now and on the phones, and everyone's kind of hidden. They don't even kind of go out and just have phone free play anymore, playing wall ball, playing tag,
Yeah.
playing dress up, shit like that. Kids don't have that. And it's really about independent free time. Also,
Right.
like being able to
Yeah, yeah,
get to
yeah.
like walk to school, have a sense of responsibility, have a sense of
Exactly. Yes.
autonomy so they can actually learn a lot of the stuff in the real world. Because one of the main complaints, especially of this book, is that the reason like these kids are so anxious is because everything from when they become an adult seems so new to them that they don't know how to do anything. They have
Oh,
no
I know.
confidence in
Yeah.
themselves because their parents have bubble wrapped them for so many years. These are
Yeah.
people in our generation who have bubble wrapped them for so many years, so scared of safety and stranger danger and all these things that they don't know how to fend for themselves. They don't know how to do
Yeah.
laundry. They don't know how to wash a dish. They don't know how to cook a meal. They don't know how to change a tire. They don't even know how to walk to the store by themselves. And honestly, when you don't have that, that is a huge, 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 huge negative. Independence is such an important quality to have in order to build confidence in people. Even nowadays, it's really
I
important.
Yeah, I agree. And this might appeal to you if you ever have kids. I just saw in the news this week, Southern California students are now banned from using cell phones
Yes,
in school.
and Florida with Ron DeSantis has also been trying to do that. It really has to come from the parents. You ban something. I mean, let's be honest, right? Like, you don't think there's ever underage drinking in high school just because it's banned? Like, no, people
Yeah.
do this. Like, we have to stop pretending that teaching abstinence in schools is going to prevent people from having sex. They're still having sex. So please teach
Yeah.
them the appropriate ways to do
Of
these things.
course. Yeah.
So they're going to figure it out, but parents really need to be responsible here and stick up to their children and stick up to these things and say, like, no, you can't have that before at least your brain develops a little bit more. And I'm grateful that we did not have these
I
smartphones when
know. Me
I was
too.
growing up in school or in college for that matter, even Facebook. When you posted stuff on Facebook, at that time when I was in college, you posted everything on Facebook. I never thought about the likes I was going to get. I just posted
Never.
on Facebook for people to see. I never thought about likes. And
Right.
so to have to think your whole world and who's going to watch you and who's going to like this and like that, I just think is
It's
pretty
odd.
upsetting. And I don't think it's really taking into account what really matters. So that is
That's
my
your
pitch
father
to read.
talking.
That's my father. That's
Yeah.
that's that's the father talking, and
That's
that is my
Father
pitch
God.
to read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And obviously, don't forget you can watch this episode on Patreon several days early and on YouTube. Please smash that subscribe button. We love you all.
All right, that's it for this week's episode. We'll be back later this week, and we love
I'll
you
be in New
guys.
York City.
Oh,
Me
that's right.
fun.
How long are you in New York, by the way?
Just like 3 days. Very quick.
Oh, great. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, don't forget, take your vitamins.
And check your pits, but especially if you have your penis, that's like so important. You got to check your pits if you have your penis. That's like
Oh.
major, 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 major. Yep.
Okay. All right. See you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.